On July 20th, 2012, James Holmes bought a ticket for The Dark Knight Rises. He entered Theater 9 around midnight in Aurora, Colorado, choosing a front row seat. He pretended to take a phone call and left through an emergency exit, and he propped the door open with a plastic doorstop. He then returned 18 minutes into the movie, tossing a tear gas grenade into the audience. The moviegoers were panicked, they were scrambling for the exits, and he began to fire. He fired a 12-gauge pump-action shotgun into the seats. He then opened fire with an AK-15 style semi-automatic rifle with a high-capacity clip, which then jammed. He also fired several shots with a Glock 40 caliber pistol. There were 41 calls to 911 that came in around 12:30 a.m. They reported explosions, they reported 10 to 20 shots fired, and they said people were down. The police, when they got there, saw blood and body tissue and spilled popcorn and the smell of gun fire and tear gas and people screaming all over. Cell phones were going off and nobody was answering them. 10 people lay dead in the theater. 2 more were pronounced dead at the hospital. 33 shots found their marks. 4 were in 6-year-old Veronica Moser Sullivan. 6 were in an aspiring sports journalist, Jessica Guai, who had just missed a deadly shooting a few weeks earlier at a Toronto food market. James Holmes told the court-appointed psychiatrist that he felt remorse, especially for the little girl, that it wasn't right to kill children. He chose to minimize the child fatalities by choosing a midnight showing of this movie because he felt sad that a child had died. It wasn't his intention. But in his skewed worldview, he said that each life he took represented a point, and that added value to his own life. And if his life had value, he wouldn't have to kill himself. He said he never wanted to build life points by taking the lives of children, but that he assumed that after this event in Aurora, Colorado, that his value had gone up 13 points, while the average person only had a life worth 1 point. So that is James Holmes. Ted Bundy kidnapped and raped and dismembered about 30 women in the course of a little over 4 years. He used a prop to show that he was injured or not as able-bodied and asked for help getting groceries in a car or whatever. And he ended up then overcoming them, killing them, raping them, and dismembering them. Got away with that for years. He was also in law school at the time. Yeah. So these guys are both murderers of many, but they're very different kinds of murderers. One, James Holmes, is considered a mass murderer. Ted Bundy is considered a serial murderer. A serial murderer normally murders at least 3 people with time in between to cool down, a chilling period. So you have time to think about it again, to chill, to not be all up in the craziness of the adrenaline-driven murder. A mass murderer normally kills without that chilling period. There's something that's sort of in the middle, which is a spree killer, which normally would kill in at least 2 different locations it would have some period of time in between, but not enough time to completely chill. Not a month in between, a year in between. Those are not spree killers. Spree killer might be considered one who kills some people in their own home. They wait a while. They go then and they kill some more people. A lot of professionals are now taking that spree killer condition out and putting them in the mass killer position. Some professionals object to that and criticize that, saying there are subtle differences and we need to understand under my compilation that there is not a one-stop shop to how to stop this or to control this or to understand this, that even within serial killers, are a wide heterogeneous population of people who kill differently and for different motivations. The same thing true of mass killers. They have different motivations. If there's spree killers, perhaps a little different motivation, perhaps not. So there's where we go with those types of killers. But when we talk about them, they're very different. When we look in the serial killer world, we have the Ted Bundy, who's this charming man who has a higher IQ and was able to just waltz into these people's lives because they saw him as charming and good looking and not likely to hurt somebody, because the more attractive you are, the less afraid of you we are. And Jeffrey Dahmer, on the other hand, killed at least 17 men over a 14-year period. That's a long period, considering Ted Bundy worked quickly. 4 years and 30 women. Jeffrey Dahmer took a little more time. He, though, dismembered and had sex with people who were drugged because he brought them back from typically bars, same-sex bars, gay bars, he called them, and he brought them back, drugged them, had sex with them, eventually killed them, some being kept alive for several days, a day or two, that kind of thing, and also kept parts of their bodies in his refrigerator and sometimes ate parts of those bodies for whatever reason he gave. He was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and he actually just tried an insanity defense because he decided that he was necrophilic, that he wanted to have sex with them while they were dead, but he really liked them drugged just because they couldn't run away. He didn't succeed in that part. John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown, remember, he was Pogo the Clown when he went to various kids' birthday parties. He preyed upon families where there wasn't as much parental attention and would lure young boys to his home. He killed at least 33 boys over a 6-year period. Many of their remains, their bones, and parts of their bodies were found under his home when they searched underneath of his home. The killer clown. He was executed in 1994. Ted Bundy was executed in 1989. And Jeffrey Dahmer was killed in prison by other prisoners. After being interviewed, actually, pretty interesting interviews when they interview his mother and his father had really sick dreams too, so you wonder about motivations and what happens. Charles Manson only had an IQ of 85. This is how different people are. And he got his murders done by getting people to believe in him and Helter Skelter and his little cultish group. And they went out and murdered Sharon Tate, who was a young actress, at his bequest. That's kind of crazy, right? David Berkowitz was Son of Sam, and he self-named it. He liked Son of Sam because he was first known as the 44 caliber killer. He went around New York and killed people, either couples that were parking in a car or two girls walking down the street, a variety of people. He killed 6 people actually within only a year, a little over a year that he was free. And he told people that he was motivated by this demonic dog that told him to kill, interestingly. Isn't that weird? Ed Kemper, a lot of you know him. He had an IQ. He was one of the higher IQs. 145. Oh my gosh, I wish for an IQ like that. Unless it makes you do that, then I don't wish for an IQ like that. But the average is 100. Most college people are 110. It could be like you're in the really high category at 120. Okay. 140 and above is usually Mensa. So they're really cool, like really smart people. So yeah, that he was a really smart guy, but he was killing dolls symbolically as a young child. He killed his grandparents as a teenager. He then went on to kill a lot of young girls between 1964 and 1973, I believe. We also have Richard Speck. We also have Aileen Wuornos, because I don't want to forget any of the females that we have. Charles Nigg, who killed 11 people at least, and 2 of those were infants, 6 men. That's kind of crazy. 3 women, 2 infants, and that's what we know about. But then we have James Holmes, who frankly killed 12 people and injured 58 in one moment. So his motivation is different. Adam Lanza at Sandy Hook Elementary School, who killed 27 people. 20 of them were young children between the ages of 5 and 10. Sung Hyung Cho, he was called, who in 2007 was responsible for the Virginia Tech massacre. And that actually was a pretty awful thing and killed 25 students and 5 professors at one time. A few hours before that, he had killed 2 other students in their dorm room. It was suspected that he had a crush on the one student that he killed, and then the other student was just somebody who tried to help her out. He is the subject of some documentaries too. So he's considered school shooter and mass shooter, because school shooters are a subset of those. We have the Marjory Stoneman Douglas high school shooting, or the Parkland shooting, and Nicholas Cruz was only 19 when he did that. So he killed 17 people in that shooting. It's pretty awful. In 1986, we had a part-time mail carrier, Patrick Sherrill. He killed 14 postal workers, and that's where we get the thing where we go, oh, don't go postal on me. Yeah, that was from a pretty awful event in 1986 where we talked about going postal now. Same kind of thing. You wanted cults. Cults can be mass killing as well, even though it was considered a mass suicide and the largest mass suicide. And he had people who were in his cult under his kind of tutelage. And he had those parents kill their children, give them poison Kool-Aid, cyanide in Kool-Aid before they took it themselves, so that they killed themselves too. That's where we get the don't drink the Kool-Aid, or you've heard even political people say in this election cycle that I think you've drank the Kool-Aid on that, or I will say you drank the Kool-Aid on that. But that was actually from the People's Temple in Jim Jones, who actually, there were 912 that were killed during the largest mass suicide. They consider that. And we also have Heaven's Gate, which was a cult situation where Mr. Applegate, Marshall Applegate, actually had 38 of his followers plus himself who killed themselves. Now, they had been believers in this apocalyptic / science fiction cultish thing, from the 1970s through the 1990s, but he believed that there was this comet that was coming and it needed to take them away. Heaven's Gate, get it? They're all going up to Heaven's Gate. But in order to get on that comet in 1997, they needed, when it got closest to Earth, they needed to all get rid of, lose their earthly tomb that they were in so that they could then enter. So they actually committed suicide on March 26, 1997, when they all wanted to gain entry to the comet so that they could go on to their next thing that they were doing. We have and we have so many other kinds of both mass killers and serial killers and cult killers. So mass killers are taking a little more of the media now, but we have always had them. And we had Timothy McVeigh a long while back, and that's an American-grown Oklahoma City bombing where actually there were 168 people who died because he parked a bomb underneath the daycare facility in the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. So he was a homegrown terrorist that killed and injured 680 and killed 168 people. We also have Omar Mateen, who was our nightclub killer, the Pulse nightclub in Orlando. He was actually a radical Muslim who some believed might have been kind of homophobic, and because he concentrated on a nightclub which had more gay patrons, but that's not really. They don't think that. They don't know that for sure. They just know he was a radicalized Muslim who killed 49 people and called while he was killing them, walking through the nightclub, shooting them. He called 2 different news organizations. So some mass killers are ideologues, like they are on the extreme end of some political or religious belief. Some are the James Holmes that I talked about, who believed irrationally, probably from his own mental disorder, schizotypal personality disorder or schizophrenia even. He believed that he got points on his life from the universe or from God because he killed people. He got a point for those individuals. We have Timothy McVeigh, who was motivated by a political belief. We have some that were frustrated. The Going Postal, Mr. Sherrill, was frustrated by his underemployment and mad at his other fellow employees and his employer, and so off people. So some we don't have an eye. Cho was very confusing. He had selective mutism for a lot of his childhood, which meant he didn't talk to many people, although he talked to his sister. He didn't talk in school. He didn't talk. And so he became a loner. But he wasn't bullied that anyone can think, but yet his almost manifesto, his speech that he gave and recorded and sent to news media on the beginning of his shooting rampage, he actually talks about being bullied and how the white rich people need to be more aware of what and so he's showing them. I'm not sure what he's showing them, but he's showing them something. So each person motivated by their own stuff, and that is, so some of these. And child killers, we also talk about those killers and why they kill when they are school shooters. That is kind of, they're usually on the fringe. They're not quite accepted. There's usually an incident where the parents are going to discipline or have disciplined them. There's a motive is usually vengeance against somebody, but they're operating on the fringe. They're not accepted completely in their school communities for the most part. Their action is premeditated, and they either have a kill list or they're angry at certain people, and Columbine comes to mind. Kip Kinkle is another one that comes to mind. Columbine actually were two people who were very upset with their school and the people in their school and thought they were awful people, and they lived certainly on the fringe, and both suffered from their own depression and had been treated by counselors. Kip Kinkle was treated also because as he had this obsession with things that exploded, bombs, that kind of thing. So he was in counseling on antidepressants and actually liked guns also. So his father, upon the graduation from counseling, because he was seemed to be better, bought him a Glock for his birthday. I don't know. Sometimes you just shake your head, right? Of course, Kip Kinkle killed his parents because he was so embarrassed at having been caught with a gun in school that he thought they couldn't take the humiliation, so he killed them. He then ate breakfast, went out, got the newspaper, watched that a little. This is 1997, so still newspapers. And then he went to school where he killed many of his classmates. So, yeah, there are just a large number of motivations, so we can try to profile people, but we also need to be aware that we're never going to profile enough. The reality for serial killers is that most of them were living in plain sight, even though we have this myth that they're all young white males. They're not. They go across all racial and genders, and although more male than female, all kinds of even economic divisions. So we have, we have all the groups covered in serial killers, and many just live, frankly, fairly ordinary lives. Look at the BTK killer. We have had some others that have been able to hide for 40 years in marriages and raise kids and marry attorneys even and divorce them and raise 3 daughters, and then find out that you were a killer from back when. BTK actually raised a family as well. But yeah, so there's just so much to say and so much to do, but they're 22 minutes already, so I'm past my 15. So goodbye, and I hope you enjoyed this little synopsis of this.